Hey, Mike.
Hi, Chris.
Okay, so we're here for another one of our sessions. I'm Chris McHale, co-founder and CEO of SPK, and I've got with me today Mike Solinep, who's our director of cloud and DevOps. Hi, Mike, again.
Hi, good morning.
And so we're going to talk about DevOps today, more than anything else, with some specific questions. But just to kick us off and get us going, why don't you just quickly tell everybody what your view or version of DevOps is, just so we all get on the same page. Different people have different um, definitions, but we'll start with that, and then we'll jump into some of the other details.
Yeah, it's definitely got a wide range of definitions
Hmm.
depending on who you talk to, and I think that's because it encompasses so many technologies and different tools and different processes, and so it does mean different things to different people, and I think that's what's important to recognize is that it's not just one thing, right? It's not just DevOps is one thing; it's a collection of things. Um, and I think that's where the complexity lies.
Okay. I've also heard, and I do believe this too, that first and foremost, it's a philosophy. So it's really
That's a
the
good way to put it.
philosophy of
Yeah.
ripping down the walls, right, between software engineers and operations people. And then, of course, that leads into all sorts of processes and practices and things that you do. But okay, and so then maybe if you could describe a good way to maybe start this off is describe some of the roles that a DevOps team or group or what have you would play for the software engineering team. And of course, some of these roles could even be played by people, not even, but could be played by people in the software team. But what are the roles that we typically ascribe to a DevOps
Sure. So
organization?
yes, some of the traditional roles include, along your build release with CI/CD. So you have some folks who are skilled in some of those areas and some of those tools and some of those processes. You have folks who are more in tune with monitoring, making sure that site reliability is their main priority, making sure the app is running, things are healthy, not only the app but also the infrastructure is healthy. Some of the other roles might include data analytics,
Mm-hmm.
folks who are trying to make sure that they can get the right insights out of the application and the infrastructure and maybe even the product, who kind of are a little bit more in tune with the application and actually write application code and also some operational code. So there's that role as well. So a lot of
Okay.
different roles.
Yeah. Um, so if somebody, so to that end, I guess, do people often just try to find one person? Yeah, if it's a small team, right? Not a huge team. If you're an enterprise, you've got a bunch of money. That's a different situation. But if you're a small or a startup team, how do you start off with this? What do you actually end up doing?
Yeah, so I think with what we've seen with smaller companies is they don't have that luxury to take on individuals that can take on all of those specific roles. So typically they just have one, maybe two folks that try to take on all of those roles, and obviously they'll try to prioritize what's most important, which is in fact the application and their product. And so there's a lot of things that don't get done or get deprioritized, and I think they end up with what we would call a bunch of technical debt, right?
Hmm.
Where those things sit on the back burner and they're not done. They kind of fester because they're not immediately high priority items, but they're important nonetheless.
Right. And if it's a kind of thing, it always strikes me when you tell me these stories that they're the kinds of things that if you could just spend a few hours along the way doing them, you save yourself an enormous amount of headache later on, or to try to address that technical debt when you now have a piece of software you're about to release that you want to make money off of.
Hmm.
And you realize, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff that we haven't done yet to get this to be more automated. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, just spending a little bit of attention on some of those items, kind of brings them to the forefront within the application, and you kind of architect for them, and you kind of are planning ahead. That way,
Hmm.
if you don't look at them at all, then further down the line you may get, and then you try to revisit them, and they may be more complex, and you end up having to refactor code or reworking a whole bunch of stuff. So
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
Do you have any stories? Because stories always bring things like this to life. Do you have any real life examples of when they didn't, like a company didn't do that? Maybe one of our clients didn't do that, or did, or anything?
Yeah, there's this one situation where, obviously monitoring is kind of secondary. It's more proactive, and so with one of the customers that we were dealing with, it wasn't necessarily a high priority, and they focused on the development of their application. And so when it came time to monitor the application, we said, okay, let's take a look holistically about how this needs to be monitored. And what we found out was that there were all these hooks that needed to go into the application. For example, they needed to rewrite some of the ways that they were exposing metrics about the application. And a lot of that triggered a lot of re-architecture of the system, a lot of reworking of the code that they had already written. And it just caused a lot of headaches and unnecessary work, which I think could have been tackled early on.
Right. So it ended up taking more time, I guess,
That's right.
to get that going. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, it's always in this day and age too, where there's a lot of technical people that are needed for a lot of business functions these days, right? It's not just, hey, there's an IT department and that's where the jobs are. So it's hard to find people too, and it's hard to source and hire people. Sometimes it's helpful for something like this to partner with a company that has a holistic, comprehensive team, right? That can do those sorts of things. Sometimes it helps just to, hey, can you do this function or that function? We'll take care of everything else. As long as it's a really close partnership, it has to be a super close partnership. I think you've done some of those, have you?
Yeah, yeah, and we're familiar with a lot of the same tools and infrastructure and cloud platforms that are in common use today by many companies. So we definitely can help accelerate a lot of that. We've got a lot of expertise on hand.
Yeah. Then the last question that just popped into my mind, this is a little bit more philosophical, but it's something that we see a lot. Um, there's this interesting almost personality that goes with a software developer, and there's kind of a different personality that goes along with an ops person. I like to say that sometimes the software developers, I mean, they're super creative. They're about creating what they're creating, right? So it's like that mindset, and then the
That's right.
mindset for a person who's in ops or operations is just different, super valuable, but it's more about like process and response and getting things done and trying to get things done methodically. I don't know. Can you speak to that a little bit, because we
Yeah.
run into that a lot, and it's a really interesting situation to manage and work through.
Yeah, and just functionally, writing application code requires a lot of focus, a lot of heads down time, whereas operational work is a little bit more interrupt driven, and we're constantly putting out fires. We're looking at different systems. We're just in so many different things. So I think it does require a different type of mindset. Being in ops and just having an eye for those types of things.
But I would add on that while that is true, the whole thing about DevOps and about this kind of partnership between the two teams is that the ops people have to be really cognizant and knowledgeable about what software development is about. I mean, they can't be sitting over here thinking, well, we're IT or something. They have to be extremely involved. They have to understand the code to a certain degree. They have to understand what software developers are doing. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work very well. That's my impression anyway.
That's so true. And like what I tell a lot of folks is that it is a marriage between teams, right?
Yeah,
You can't necessarily just chuck things over the fence
yeah,
one way or the other. They both have kind of got to take issues and look at them together.
yeah,
It's much closer of a relationship that they need to have.
yeah, yeah. Well, great, Mike. Thanks for your time this morning. Really appreciate it, and that's a fun conversation. And we could
Yeah,
do a deeper
that's fun.
dive on one of those at some point. But I think hopefully this is of help to the people who are listening.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right. Have a great morning.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.